I miss you. Those 3 words flashed on my husband's phone like a warning signal in the middle of a quiet Sunday afternoon. I froze in the living room, staring at the notification while Brian was in the kitchen preparing his famous chicken parmesan. The message was from someone named Julia, and the small heart emoji next to her name in his contacts told me everything I needed to know. My name is Jennifer, and I am 32 years old. I have been married to Brian for 7 years, and until that moment, I believed I understood exactly what my life looked like. We lived in a modest yet comfortable home in Nashville, Tennessee, a house with a wraparound porch and enough room for the 2 children we had often discussed having. I worked as a project manager for a furniture manufacturing company called Oak & Light Publishing, overseeing logistics and client relations. Brian was a sales representative for a medical equipment distributor, a job that required occasional travel and late nights, more often than I would have liked. The warning signs had been there for weeks. I noticed how he started keeping his phone face down on every surface. The way he would step outside to take calls, claiming the reception was better on the porch. How he suddenly became more attentive in the mornings, kissing my forehead before leaving for work, as if trying to convince both of us that everything was fine. I noticed the new cologne, the gym membership he actually used, the careful way he deleted his messages every night before bed. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. I convinced myself that 7 years of marriage meant something, that the vows we exchanged in that small downtown church outweighed my doubts. I believed Brian loved me, that he would never betray the life we built together. But holding his phone in my hand, watching Julia's message light up the screen, I realized I had been lying to myself for far too long. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Julia appeared beneath the first. I can't stop thinking about last night. My stomach dropped. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and I gripped the edge of the coffee table to steady myself. The night before, Brian had told me he was working late on a presentation for an important client. He returned home around 11 p.m., smelling faintly of a floral scent that wasn't mine, kissed me on the cheek, and crawled into bed beside me. I believed him. Every word. From the kitchen, I could hear him humming along to the radio, completely unaware that his entire world was about to shift. The aroma of garlic and tomatoes drifted through the house, a cruel reminder of the domestic life I thought we were building. He was making dinner for his wife, while his mistress sent him love messages. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting him immediately, instead of yelling, crying, or throwing his phone, I did something that even surprised me. I picked up his phone, entered the passcode he thought I didn't know, and opened the thread with Julia. The conversation spanned months of flirtation, late-night messages, secret plans. I scrolled with a growing sense of numbness, watching their relationship unfold in tiny digital fragments. Pet names I had never heard him use, promises about a future that didn't include me, complaints about a wife who didn't understand him, who was too focused on work, who had let herself go. That last remark hurt the most. Yes, I had gained 15 pounds since our wedding. But I had also worked 60-hour weeks to help pay off his student loans. I had put my own dreams of returning to school on hold so we could buy this house. I had done everything I thought a devoted wife should do, and this was what I received in return. Julia was 25. Her profile picture appeared in the corner of the screen. A young woman with dark hair, bright eyes, and a confident smile, the kind that comes from not knowing how harsh the world can be. She worked in the same office as Brian, managing administrative duties, and apparently managing my husband too. Their messages revealed that they had been involved for 3 months. I heard Brian's footsteps approaching from the kitchen and quickly locked the phone, placing it back on the coffee table exactly where he had left it. He appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel, looking every bit the devoted husband. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, he said with a smile. "Do you want to open a bottle of wine?" I looked at him, really looked, and wondered how I had missed the deception behind those familiar brown eyes. "Sure," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "That sounds perfect." He went back to the kitchen, and I picked up the phone again. This time, I knew exactly what I had to do. I typed the response carefully, choosing each word with the precision of someone handling a delicate situation. My fingers trembled slightly, but my mind was calm, like the center of a storm. "Come by tonight. My wife's out visiting her sister." I'll leave the door unlocked. I stared at the message for a long moment before pressing send. Part of me couldn't believe what I was doing, but a deeper, angrier part understood that this was the only way to bring the truth to light. I was exhausted by suspicions and partial answers. I was tired of lying beside a man who lied to my face every day. I needed to see it for myself, to watch them try to justify themselves with no place left to hide. The reply came almost instantly, followed by a string of excited emojis and a simple, "See you at 7." I checked the time, 4:30 p.m., giving me 2.5 hours to prepare for the confrontation that could end my marriage. I set the phone down and entered the kitchen, where Brian stirred a pot of marinara sauce with the focus of a man who thought he had escaped detection. "Actually," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "I just remembered I need to drop some paperwork at my sister's tonight. Do you mind if I go after dinner?" Brian's face lit up in a way that made my stomach turn. "Of course not. Take your time. I'll probably catch up on some work emails anyway." Work emails? The audacity of that lie was almost impressive. I nodded and smiled, playing the oblivious wife one last time. Dinner felt surreal. We sat across from each other at the dining table, eating the meal he had prepared, and making small talk about trivial matters. He spoke about a difficult client at work. I mentioned a shipping delay that had caused problems on my end. We discussed the weather, the neighbors, and the leaky faucet he had promised to fix. It was the most ordinary conversation of our marriage, and the most painful. Every time he smiled, I thought about Julia's messages. Every time he reached for my wine glass, I imagined the hands that had been with another woman. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, waiting for the moment to put my plan into action. At 6:15, I pushed my plate away and carried it to the sink. "I should head to my sister's before it gets too late," I said casually. "I might stay for a cup of tea, so don't wait up." Brian stood and kissed my forehead, the same gesture he had used for weeks as a smokescreen for his guilt. "Drive safe," he said. "Tell Melissa I said hello." I grabbed my purse and keys and walked out the front door, but I didn't head to my sister's house. Instead, I drove around the corner, parked under the shadow of a large oak tree, and waited. The sky was darkening, painting the Nashville suburbs in shades of orange and purple. Through my rearview mirror, I watched our house, my heart racing. At 6:45, I saw Brian step onto the porch, looking up and down the street, as if to confirm I was gone. He went back inside, and I imagined him hurrying through the house, arranging everything perfectly for his guest. The thought made my stomach turn. At 6:55, I got out of the car and quietly walked back toward my home, keeping to the shadows. I circled to the side entrance that led through the garage. Using my key, I let myself in silently. The house was dim, lit only by the soft glow of candles Brian had placed in the living room. Candles he had never lit for me. I positioned myself in the hallway, out of view of the front door but close enough to observe everything. My hands trembled, but my determination was firm. After 7 years of building a life with this man, I deserved to know what he had been hiding. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. From the shadows, I watched as Brian smoothed his shirt and walked to the door with a nervous smile. He opened it, and there she was. Julia wore a tight red skirt that barely reached mid-thigh, and a black blouse unbuttoned just enough to suggest, without revealing. Her dark hair fell in loose waves, and her lips were painted the same crimson as her skirt. She looked like she had spent hours preparing for this private meeting in my home. "I've been thinking about you all day," she purred, stepping inside and reaching for Brian's chest. He took her hand and guided her into the house, glancing nervously toward the empty driveway. "Get in before anyone sees you." They stood together in my living room in front of my couch, beneath the wedding portrait on the wall. Julia wrapped her arms around him and leaned in for a kiss. That's when I stepped out of the shadows. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the moment, "someone already has." The expression on Brian's face was unforgettable. The color drained from his skin, so fast I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came, just a strangled sound, maybe my name, maybe a prayer. Julia stumbled back in her heels, almost tripping over the coffee table, trying to put distance between herself and my husband. "Jennifer," Brian finally managed, his voice breaking. "What are you doing here? You were supposed to be at your sister's house." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, observing them both with detached attention, like a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. Change of plans, I said calmly. I thought I'd come home and surprise my husband. Imagine my surprise to find he already had company. Julia's eyes widened in panic, darting between Brian and me like a trapped animal. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered. I just came to drop off some work files. Brian said you were out of town, and I thought it would be okay to stop. One word cut through her excuse like a knife. I held up Brian's phone, which I had retrieved from the coffee table before taking my position in the hallway, and read every message. So please don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is innocent. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Julia's face twisted in pure fear while Brian froze beside her, appearing as if he had just watched his entire world collapse. The candles flickered gently, their shadows dancing across the walls of the living room. Jennifer, please, Brian said, stepping toward me with his hands raised as if pleading. Let me explain. It's not what you think. Julia and I were just friends. We work together. Sometimes we text each other, but it doesn't mean anything. You're exaggerating this completely. I laughed, a cold sound even to my own ears. Just friends. Friends who miss each other. Friends who can't stop thinking about last night. I scrolled through the messages and read them aloud. I love the way your hands feel on my skin. I can't wait until we can be together for real. When are you going to tell her the truth? Each line hit like a physical blow. Brian flinched at every sentence, his expression shifting from shame to anger and then desperate denial. Julia pressed herself against the wall, arms wrapped around herself, trying to hold together. Those messages were taken out of context, Brian stammered. We were just joking. Flirting, okay. I admit it was inappropriate, but nothing actually happened. I never touched her. I never. 3 months, I interrupted. According to your messages, you've been sleeping together for 3 months. You told her you loved her on October 15th. You promised to leave me by Christmas, and you complained I was too fat, too boring, too focused on my career to give you what you wanted. I paused, letting each accusation settle. Did I miss anything? Or do you want to keep lying? Finally, Brian's mask fell away. His shoulders slumped, head hanging in defeat. Okay, he whispered. Yes, Julia and I have been seeing each other. But it didn't start because I don't love you. It started because things were difficult between us, and she was there. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake that lasted 3 months. I know, I said flatly. I know it's bad, but I can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. I'll end things with Julia tonight and spend the rest of my life making it up to you. He stepped closer, eyes pleading. Please, Jennifer, don't throw away 7 years over one stupid mistake. I looked at him, searching for any trace of the man I had married, the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, forsaking all others. But all I saw was a stranger, wearing my husband's face while destroying everything we built. It wasn't one mistake, I said quietly. It was hundreds of choices. Every time you texted her instead of talking to me. Every time you lied about where you were. Every time you touched her, then came home and touched me. Those weren't accidents, Brian. Those were decisions. And now I'm making a decision, too. I turned to Julia, still pressed against the wall, hoping it might swallow her. Her eyes were red, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked young, scared, and completely pitiful. You can have him, I said. I hope he makes you as happy as he made me. Julia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She grabbed her purse from the floor and ran to the front door, heels clicking sharply. The door slammed behind her, echoing through the house like a gunshot. Brian and I were left alone in the candlelit living room, surrounded by the ruins of our marriage. He was crying, tears streaming down his face. Part of me felt a small, vindictive satisfaction, but mostly I felt exhausted, worn down by years of loving someone who never truly loved me back. Jennifer, he sobbed. Please, I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly. No, Brian. We can't, because I don't want to. The next hour felt surreal. Brian tried every tactic to sway me. Apologies, excuses, promises, and finally anger when nothing worked. He paced the room, hands flailing, trying to rewrite the story of his affair into something forgivable. "You don't understand," he repeated over and over. Julia pursued me. She was aggressive. She kept coming to my desk, flirting, making me feel noticed. "You were always absorbed in work, coming home exhausted, always prioritizing the company over our marriage." I felt invisible in my own home. I perched on the couch arm, watching him with detached curiosity. "So it's my fault?" I asked. "That's what you're saying. I made you cheat because I worked too much." "That's not what I said," he replied. "I'm saying there were issues in our marriage that we both ignored. Julia was a symptom, not the problem. If we had communicated better, if you had been attentive to my needs, this wouldn't have happened." His words stunned me. Here was a man who had secretly slept with a 25-year-old coworker for 3 months, yet he had found a way to cast himself as the victim. I thought of the nights I worked late to help pay off his student loans, the vacations we canceled for his conferences, the repeated sacrifices I made believing in our future together. "Let me ask you something," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Did Julia know you were married?" Brian paused, confused. "What?" "Your girlfriend, Julia. Did she know you had a wife when she started seeing you?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, obviously. Everyone at the office knows I'm married. I wear my wedding ring every day." "So she knew," I repeated. "And she pursued you anyway. And you, knowing your vows, chose to pursue her. Both of you knew exactly what you were doing, and did it anyway." Brian's face reddened. "It's more complicated than that. You're oversimplifying." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not. You're trying to make it complicated to avoid responsibility. But it's simple. You chose her over me, repeatedly, for 3 months. And now I'm making a choice too." His expression shifted from defensive to desperate. "What are you saying?" "I want a divorce." The word hung heavily between us. Brian's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, panic, and almost rage. "You can't be serious. You're going to end our marriage over one affair? People recover from this. Couples survive infidelity. We can go to therapy, rebuild trust, we can." "I don't want to rebuild anything with you," I interrupted. "I spent 7 years building a life with someone I thought I knew. Every memory, every promise, every plan is now tainted by your lies. I refuse to spend my life cleaning up your mess." Brian's jaw tightened. "This is an overreaction. You're emotional. Take some time. Sleep on it. In the morning, you'll see more clearly." "I am calm," I said. And it was true. A quiet certainty settled in me. I was doing the right thing. I had never felt calmer, and my decision was made. I stood and headed toward the bedroom, Brian following, still searching for the words to undo his actions. But there were none. No words could erase 3 months of betrayal. In the bedroom, I pulled a suitcase from the closet and began packing clothes and essentials. Brian stood in the doorway, disbelief etched on his face. "Where are you going?" "To my sister's house. For real this time." "Jennifer, please don't do this. We can talk. We can figure it out. I'll do anything. Therapy, change jobs, never speak to Julia again. Just don't leave." I paused, studying him, the man I had loved for nearly a decade, the man I had built my life around. He looked small, scared, pathetic, and I felt nothing but contempt. "You had 3 months to think about your choices," I said quietly. 3 months to consider the impact on our marriage, to stop, to confess, to make it right. You didn't. You lied, snuck around, and promised her you'd leave me. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. I'm leaving. I zipped up my suitcase and grabbed my laptop bag from the desk. Brian tried one last time to block my path, but I walked past him without a word. I moved down the hallway, through the living room where the candles were still burning, and stepped outside. The night air was cool on my face, a relief from the heavy tension inside. I loaded my things into the trunk and got into the driver's seat. Through the window, I saw Brian standing on the porch, his face full of devastation. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. By the time I reached my sister Melissa's house, she had already opened the door. She looked at me, saw the expression on my face, and stepped aside without asking questions. That was Melissa. She always knew when to act and when to offer quiet support. "Guest room's ready," she said, taking my suitcase. I'll put on some coffee. I followed her into the warmth of her kitchen and sank into a chair at the small breakfast table. The familiar yellow walls, slightly crooked cabinet doors, and her collection of coffee mugs from every city she'd visited wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. Melissa's house had always been my refuge, my safe place during every major crisis, from failed job interviews to our mother's funeral 3 years ago. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, placing a steaming mug in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth seep into my cold fingers. Brian has been having an affair. Her name is Julia, and she works at his office. It's been going on for 3 months. Melissa sat across from me, her expression carefully neutral. "How did you find out?" she asked. I told her everything. The strange behavior over the past few weeks, the text message that appeared while Brian was cooking dinner, the trap I had set, Julia showing up in that bright red skirt. I told her about the confrontation, Brian's weak attempts to blame me, and my decision to leave. By the time I finished, my coffee had gone cold, and Melissa's expression had shifted from neutral to something close to satisfaction. "Good for you," she said simply. "Good for me?" I asked. "Yes. Good for not staying. Good for walking out." So many women would have believed his excuses, agreed to counseling, convinced themselves the marriage was worth saving. But you didn't. You saw who he truly was, and you left. That takes courage. I had never thought of it as courage. I thought of it as survival, self-preservation, the only response to a betrayal so deep that forgiveness seemed impossible. Maybe courage and survival were the same thing sometimes. "I wasted 7 years," I said, my voice catching. 7 years with someone capable of this. How did I not see it? How did I miss all the signs? Melissa reached across the table and held my hand. "You didn't waste anything. You love someone who turned out to be different than you thought. That's not your failure, it's his." We sat in silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock the only sound. I thought about everything that was coming next. The divorce proceedings, the division of assets, the explanations to friends and family. It was all overwhelming. A mountain of pain and paperwork that I would have to climb step by step. "Can I stay here for a while?" I asked, "just until I figure out my next move." "You can stay as long as you need," Melissa replied. "The guest room is yours." I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you." Melissa smiled, and for the first time since I had seen Julia's message on Brian's phone, I felt more than numb devastation. I felt hope, small and fragile, like a seedling pushing through frozen ground, but hope nonetheless. That night, I lay in Melissa's guest bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone sat on the nightstand, lighting up with text messages and voicemails from Brian every few minutes. I didn't read any of them. I already knew what they would say. More apologies, more excuses, more desperate pleas for a second chance. I wasn't interested in hearing any of it. Instead, my thoughts turned to Julia. Had she gone home to her own apartment after leaving our house? Had she called Brian to debrief about the disaster? Did she feel guilty or vindicated? Did she see herself as a villain or a victim? Did she truly believe Brian would leave me for her, or had she known all along she was just a temporary distraction? It occurred to me that I should hate her. She had knowingly helped destroy my marriage, assisted Brian in lying to my face for months, and planned to sleep with my husband in my bed. Yet, when I searched my heart for hatred, all I felt was pity. Julia was 25, young enough to believe a married man's promises meant something. She would learn the truth eventually, that men who cheat will often cheat again. She would realize she had traded her self-respect for a relationship built on betrayal. But that wasn't my problem. My problem was figuring out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of my marriage. My problem was finding a new place to live, updating my address across countless accounts, explaining to coworkers, friends, and extended family that the husband they had seen at barbecues and holiday parties wasn't who they thought he was. My problem was learning to be alone again after 7 years of partnership. I closed my eyes, trying to remember who I had been before Brian. It had been so long that the memories felt faded, like photographs left too long in the sun. Yet, beneath the layers of marriage, compromise, and gradual erosion, she was still there, the woman I had been before becoming someone's wife, the woman I would have to become again. Tomorrow, I decided I would start making plans. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer and begin the divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, I would tell my boss I might need time off to handle a personal matter. Tomorrow, I would start the long, painful process of untangling my life from Brian's. But tonight, I would allow myself to grieve. I would mourn the future I had envisioned, the children we had imagined, the retirement we had dreamed of. I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of the loss, and then I set it aside and moved forward. That's what I had always done. I survived. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Melissa moving around in the kitchen. Sunlight poured through the guest room window, impossibly bright after the darkness of the night before. For a moment, I forgot where I was. For a moment, I imagined I was in my own bed, in my own home, with my husband down the hall. Then reality returned, harsh and unrelenting. I checked my phone and saw 23 missed calls from Brian, followed by a series of increasingly desperate texts. The first ones were apologetic, the later ones angry. The last, sent at 3 a.m., simply read, "Please call me. I'm begging you." I deleted them all without replying. In the kitchen, Melissa had already placed a plate for me at the table. I sat down and forced myself to eat, though I had no appetite. The pancakes tasted like cardboard, yet I chewed and swallowed mechanically, knowing I needed strength for the battles ahead. "I called in sick today," Melissa said, joining me at the table. "I thought you might want some company." "You didn't have to," I replied. "I know. I wanted to." She poured herself a cup of coffee and looked at me with concern. "Have you thought about your next steps?" I nodded slowly. "I need to find a lawyer. A good one. Someone who handles divorce cases specifically. I actually have a recommendation if you want," she said. "Remember my friend Laura from book club? Her divorce was finalized last year, and she spoke highly of her attorney. I can give you the number." I accepted the name and number gratefully, adding it to my mental list of urgent tasks. Find a lawyer, file for divorce, handle the house, cancel joint credit cards, change life insurance beneficiaries. The logistics of ending a marriage were overwhelming, a bureaucratic challenge that would take weeks, if not months. But first, I had to deal with Brian. My phone rang again. His name lit up the screen. I paused, then answered. "Jennifer, thank God. I've been calling all night. We need to talk. Please, just come home so we can." "We are not talking in person," I interrupted. "Not anymore. From now on, all communication will be through email. I'm contacting a lawyer today and you should do the same." "A lawyer? Jennifer, isn't that premature? We haven't even tried to work this out. We haven't gone to counseling." My voice was cold, flat, stripped of any emotion he hoped to manipulate. "Listen carefully. I am filing for divorce. This is not a negotiation, not a threat. It's a statement of fact. The only question now is whether you'll be reasonable or make this difficult." Silence followed. Then, softly, he said, "I can't believe you're doing this after everything we've been through." "Everything we've been through?" I repeated. 7 years of marriage, the vows, the future we planned. You threw all of that away for a 25-year-old secretary, Brian. You don't get to play the injured party. "She's not a secretary," he said defensively. "She's an administrative coordinator. She understood me in ways you never did." I laughed, harsh and bitter. "Unbelievable. Even now you defend her. You're trying to convince yourself what you did was justified." "I'm not justifying anything," he said. I don't care about your excuses or explanations." I cut in. "I only care about ending this marriage as quickly and cleanly as possible. Here's the plan. I contact a lawyer today, you contact one, and we settle this like adults." His tone hardened. "Fine, if that's how you want to play it. But don't think you'll take me to the cleaners. I know my rights. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together." "Half of everything we built together?" I repeated slowly. "The house in both our names that I paid the down payment for? The savings account I contributed 80% to? The retirement fund I maxed out while you spent on gym memberships, cologne, and dinners for your mistress?" He sputtered, searching for words. "That's not fair. I contributed emotionally. I supported you. I was there when your mother died. You were sleeping with Julia when my mother died," I said, letting the silence settle. I could hear his shallow, rapid breathing. Exactly. I continued as I reviewed your messages again. The affair began in August. My mother passed away in September. During the funeral, you were texting Julia, expressing how much you wished you could be with her instead of facing my grieving family. Brian made a noise that sounded like a sob. I didn't mean to misinterpret it. I was under immense stress and unsure how to cope with your pain. So, you sought comfort elsewhere. I understand that fully, and yet, I know I will never forgive you for it. I hung up before he could reply. My hands shook, but my voice remained steady throughout the call. I felt proud of my inner strength, the cold determination in my veins, the resilience I had discovered within myself amid this betrayal. Melissa had listened quietly through the entire conversation. Now, she reached across the table and held my hand. That was incredible, she said. You were incredible. I exhaled slowly, gathering my thoughts. I'm calling the lawyer now. The sooner we begin, the sooner this is over. Melissa nodded, sliding her phone across the table with Laura's contact already ready. I dialed the number and waited. It was time to reclaim my life. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings and paperwork. My attorney, Victoria, a sharp professional specializing in high-conflict divorces, was exactly what I needed. Practical without being cold, empathetic without being sentimental, and absolutely unyielding in protecting my interests. From what you've told me, you're in a strong position, she said in our first meeting. The house was purchased with your down payment, and you've been the primary contributor to all joint accounts. Tennessee follows equitable distribution, meaning assets are divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. Considering the affair, we can make a strong case for you to receive the majority of the marital property. I nodded, taking notes while everything was recorded. What about the affair itself? Does that factor into the divorce? I asked. It can, Victoria explained. Tennessee recognizes fault-based divorce, and adultery as valid grounds. If we can prove the affair, which it seems you've already documented extensively, we can leverage it to strengthen your negotiating position. I had spent days compiling every piece of evidence I could find, screenshots of Brian's texts with Julia, forwarded to my email before leaving the house, credit card statements showing hotel and restaurant charges on nights he claimed to be working late, phone records with hundreds of calls and texts between him and her. It was a complete record of betrayal, and each new entry brought a grim sense of satisfaction. Within a week, Brian's attorney contacted us, attempting to negotiate a settlement outside of court. Their first offer was laughable, a 50-50 split of all assets with no recognition of the affair or the financial imbalance between us. Victoria rejected it outright. They're testing us, she said. They want to see if you're desperate enough to accept a bad deal just to end this quickly. We need to prove you're not. Our counteroffer was firm. I demanded the house, the retirement accounts, and 60% of the savings. Brian would take full responsibility for his remaining student loans, and the affair would be publicly acknowledged in the divorce records as part of the permanent documentation. Brian's attorney deemed this unreasonable. Victoria told them it was actually fair, given the circumstances. Negotiations dragged on. Meanwhile, I immersed myself in work, driven by a focus that even surprised me. My furniture manufacturing company was expanding rapidly, and there was no shortage of projects needing attention. My boss, Patricia, a gruff but fair woman, noticed my increased productivity and asked if everything was okay at home. I'm going through a divorce, I replied simply. Work helps me keep my mind off things. She nodded, understanding. Take the time you need. If work helps, then we're here for you. I appreciated her discretion. No probing questions, no empty reassurances, just understanding. She didn't suggest that I should try to save my marriage. Instead, she accepted my situation and gave me the space to handle it on my own. That night, I returned to Melissa's guest room and lay awake, thinking about what lay ahead. I was 32, soon to be divorced, with no children and an uncertain future. By conventional standards, my life seemed like a disaster. Yet, amid the chaos, there was a peculiar sense of freedom. I could go anywhere, do anything, become anyone. The limitations of my marriage, the compromises I had made to keep Brian happy, no longer applied. For the first time in 7 years, my life was entirely my own. Brian continued calling and texting, though less frequently over the weeks. His messages followed a familiar pattern: apologies in the morning, anger in the evening, desperation in the middle of the night. I ignored them all. When communication was necessary, it went through our attorneys or carefully drafted emails that Victoria reviewed before I sent them. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Despite his initial resistance, Brian eventually agreed to most of our terms. Perhaps he was tired of fighting, or his attorney explained the weaknesses in his case. Perhaps Julia, who I learned through mutual friends had stopped speaking to him, made the situation too painful to prolong. Whatever the reason, the final settlement gave me nearly everything I asked for. I kept the house, retained most of the savings, and Brian assumed his student loan debt. The affair was officially recorded in the divorce papers as grounds for dissolution. On the day the divorce was finalized, I stood on my porch, watching the sun set over Nashville, in a house that was now completely mine. 3 months after discovering Brian's affair, I felt transformed, not unrecognizable, but subtly and profoundly changed. The woman who had once stood in that candlelit living room, watching her husband with another woman, felt like a distant memory. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more cautious about trust. I made the house my own. Every trace of Brian had been removed, his clothes donated, his books and electronics sold or given away, his presence erased from every corner. I repainted the living room, swapping the beige walls he preferred for a deep, rich blue I had always loved. I bought new furniture, curtains and bedding. I even adopted a sleek gray tabby named Oliver, who followed me like a loyal shadow. Rebuilding became unexpectedly therapeutic. Each small change was a declaration of independence, a statement that this was my space, my life, my future. Brian had no claim here. He was a closed chapter, a mistake I would not repeat. Through mutual friends, I occasionally heard updates about Brian. Things were not going well. Julia had ended their relationship shortly after the confrontation at our house. Without her, Brian spiraled, drinking excessively, struggling at work, and alienating colleagues who once considered him a friend. Rumors suggested he might be fired, that his apartment was in disarray, and that he had stopped caring about his appearance. Part of me felt satisfaction. He had sacrificed our marriage for a fantasy, and now it lay in ruins. He was facing the consequences of his choices. Yet, a smaller, more compassionate part of me felt pity. Brian had made terrible decisions, but he was still human and still suffering. While I could not forgive him, I did not dwell on his pain. Instead, I focused on my own recovery. I began seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dorothy, who helped me navigate the layers of grief and betrayal. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, friends Brian had subtly discouraged me from seeing. I joined a Saturday morning hiking group, pushing my body on trails that left me exhausted yet exhilarated. I was rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an email from Brian, the first direct communication since the settlement. Jennifer had read, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to express this. I am truly sorry for what I did. I know that no apology can erase the hurt I caused, yet I want you to understand that it occupies my thoughts every day. I destroyed the most meaningful part of my life, and that is a reality I must carry forever. I am not seeking forgiveness, nor do I expect anything in return. I only want you to know that I finally understand. I recognize what I lost, and I am genuinely sorry, Brian." I read the email twice, then a third time. After that, I deleted it without replying. There was nothing to add. Sorry could not undo 7 years of marriage. It could not erase the image of Julia standing in my living room wearing that red skirt. It could not restore the months spent tangled in legal battles or the destruction of everything I had built. Brian's regret remained his burden to bear. I had let go of mine the moment I walked away. That weekend, I drove to a small town near Nashville to visit a ceramic studio I had long wanted to explore. I spent the afternoon learning to shape clay on a wheel, my hands coated in mud, my mind focused solely on the spinning clay and the instructor's careful guidance. It was messy, imperfect, and entirely rewarding. When I finished, I held a crooked bowl, far from the smooth examples on the shelves, but it was mine, made from nothing by my own hands. It was a new beginning. 6 months after discovering Brian's affair, I stood in my newly renovated kitchen, surveying the life I had reconstructed from the ruins. Morning sunlight streamed through windows I had cleaned myself, illuminating countertops I had selected and cabinets I had painted. Oliver weaved around my ankles, purring as I poured my first cup of coffee. I felt a steady, grounded happiness, not the naive joy of my early marriage, but a deeper, resilient contentment. I realized happiness cannot be granted or taken by anyone else. It is built, piece by piece, through choices and effort. My career had flourished since the divorce. Patricia had recognized my dedication and promoted me to senior project manager, a role with more responsibility and a significant raise. I excelled at my work, better than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Without Brian's dismissive comments undermining me, I finally saw my own worth clearly. I had also begun dating cautiously. Nothing serious, just casual dinners with men I met through friends or apps. Being single in my 30s, navigating dating with the scars of a failed marriage, was unfamiliar but unexpectedly liberating. I could take my time, set boundaries, and walk away from anyone who failed to treat me with respect. As for Brian, updates from mutual friends painted a bleak picture. He had been fired after ongoing performance problems and complaints, evicted from his apartment for non-payment, and returned to live with his parents outside Knoxville. Julia, the woman for whom he abandoned our marriage, had apparently moved on with a younger man, unburdened by a past of betrayal. Rumor had it Brian tried repeatedly to reach her with flowers, letters, and messages that were ignored. He had become what he once despised, a desperate ex clinging to someone who had already moved forward. The irony was not lost on me, yet I did not linger on his misfortune. His suffering was a natural consequence of his own decisions, not mine to watch or celebrate. I had my own life and my own future to build. He no longer played any part in it. On the anniversary of discovering the affair, I took an action I had been planning for weeks. I collected every remaining item tied to my marriage, my wedding dress, photo albums, letters, and cards from Brian, and drove to a secluded spot in the woods outside the city. There, in a clearing, I built a small fire. One by one, I placed the remnants of my past marriage into the flames that I watched the white silk of my wedding dress turn to ashes. I watched the smiling faces in the photographs curl and blacken. I watched the handwritten promises of eternal love vanish into smoke. It was not angry. It was not seeking revenge. It was simply a closing of a chapter, a final acknowledgement that the past was gone and could never return. When the fire burned itself out, I scattered the ashes and drove home. Brian spent the following year struggling to piece his life back together. Without a job, without Julia, and without the comfortable home he had taken for granted, he had no choice but to face the full consequences of what he had destroyed. His parents, who learned of his affair through family friends, were disappointed in ways he could not avoid. His professional reputation suffered due to the circumstances of his termination, and Julia, the woman he had risked everything for, never spoke to him again. I, on the other hand, continued to grow and thrive. A promotion at work opened new doors and new connections. The friendships I had rebuilt became genuine sources of joy and support. The house that had once felt like a prison transformed into a sanctuary, a space entirely my own. Standing in my kitchen that morning, 6 months after the most difficult day of my life, I realized something crucial. The affair had been painful, but it had also been a gift. It revealed Brian's true character before I wasted any more years on him. It forced me to discover strength I hadn't known I possessed. It gave me the opportunity to create a life that was authentically mine, untouched by compromise or betrayal. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window and smiled at the woman I saw there. She was stronger than ever before. She was wiser. She was free. That night, sitting on my porch and watching the stars appear over Nashville, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The pain, the anger, the slow and challenging process of healing, it had all shaped me. The revenge I had taken was not dramatic or loud. It was simply this: a good life lived fully, built from the ruins of everything he had tried to destroy. And I realized then that this was the sweetest revenge of all.